All right, guys, Fascia Friday episode 6, and this will be actually our penultimate Fascia Friday episode as we're coming down the stretch here. But for this week, I wanted to take a look at the kind of the historical timeline or perspective of fascia and really what the path was, in our discovery and our understanding of the fascial system. And it's been kind of cool, putting out more of this fascia-based content has actually prompted a lot of questions and interactions on things that I genuinely had not thought about or really had invested much time into. So this being one of them, I really started to kind of become more curious about how this evolution has occurred and really what the origin of fascia is. So bear in mind with this, we're going to be looking at material from one study. This is one of many that have looked at the history of fascia. So this isn't necessarily the definitive, material or process of how we've gotten to how we've evolved our understanding of the fascial system. This is just this paper, and then we're going to take a look at something here in the back end in which it's the same case. But with that said, it's pretty conclusive that we can trace fascia back about 400 years, and mostly this leads to Roman and Greek medical doctrines in which it seems as if it was almost described as more of a membrane than as a connective tissue or anything else. But the term itself, fascia, loosely translates to a swath or a band, and this is the precipice of a lot of similarities that we'll see throughout the decades and the centuries and again the evolutions. But initially it was identified in surgical procedures and in obviously cadaver experiments, but it was really defined in an ambiguous way. But there were some consistencies, and those being membranous, permeating throughout the entire body, having nervous system innervation, having some circulation innervation. And it was, pretty much conclusive from the jump that this was a universal, as it's written here, covering garment or common vest. So even from the earliest days, we can see some consistency there. As we move into the 1700s and 1800s, this is really where it started to become defined anatomically, and the term fascia had a distinct representation for medical terminologies in human anatomy. But give or take about 10 identifiable medical terms. And really, it was categorized in 3 different ways. And the first one being a general type of tissue, which is as ambiguous as it's written. And then, starting to throw in some more like key terms or phrases such as landmarks or, sectioning or compartmentalizing components to fascia. And I think at this phase, it was really accepted that this was something that, may or may not have influence on movement, but it was definitely a definitive structure. As we move more into the 1900s, this is where we see a definitive rise in studying and application and terminologies, and the medical vocabulary, so to speak, grew from 10 to 250 terms. So that gives you all the indication you need to know. At this phase, we looked at it as either being more fibroareolar or kind of beneath the skin and, kind of covering and encasing the muscles, which, today we refer to more as superficial fascia, or aponeurotic, which is, again, more of that landmark connection point or intersection of muscle, connective tissue, and fascia. For the more of the modern day understanding, 2007 is really where it seems to have taken off, and there's just been kind of a ravenous growing curiosity to what fascia is, who it really pertains to in terms of practice. Is this more of a medical thing, or is this more of a performance thing? And I think the jury's still out on a lot of this. And even though my view is blatantly obvious or biased in this sense, I think that it's good that we are seeing the uptick of curiosity, if nothing else. So whether or not you think this is something that's involved or even really significant on the performance end, it's clear that there's something to the fascia system that we are interested in. And really, they boil this down into 2 distinct perspectives, and that being either one, the reductionist descriptive structural perspective, in which basically you recognize that the fascial system is a thing, but you don't really see it as much beyond just being supportive or structuring tissue in an anatomical sense. And then on the opposite end, we have holistic, heuristic, and functional, which is interdisciplinary or, in more of a practical sense. But to expand a little bit on the modernization of fascia and how it is classified, again, my disclaimer here, this is just one study, and I will patently say that there is anything, but a conclusive agreement on not only what fascia is, but how it should be classified and how it should be defined, and really the involvement or its involvement in our movement, in health, in injury, and so on and so forth. So this study from Kumka and Bonner from 2012, which is actually a little bit further back, we're looking at kind of the morphological descriptions and then how those fall into classification. So again, there's going to be some inconsistency depending on where you look. But for the sake of this, they break it down into 4 broad classifications, those being linking, fascicular, compression, or separating. For strength and conditioning's sake, we're really most interested in the first 2 over here, whereas massage therapists, bodywork, soft tissue specialists, obviously physicians, doctors, they're more interested typically in this end over here. But starting out with linking fascia, this is probably what everybody, at least again in the strength and conditioning community, is familiar with, or the interactions or the understanding that they've had of the fascial system. But for this case, we break linking down into dynamic and passive. And for dynamic, this is where we're thinking about actually facilitating movement, structural stability, global force transfer, kinetic integration, and we're thinking about structures such as thoracolumbar fascia, the IT band, pec fascia, but major muscle groups, major junctions, and creating symbiotic movement is the way that I kind of view it. On the passive side, this is really just more so maintaining structure, and then we start to get more into the proprioceptive element of it. So we look at the rectus sheath, cervical fascia, aponeuroses. This is where we are getting a lot of cellular and proprioceptive communication, and kind of providing a medium for body to brain, brain to body signaling. As for the fascicular fascia, this is where we're thinking again about force transmission and proprioceptive feedback, but also providing protection for nerves and vessels. So for this, we're looking at endomysium, perimysium, and epimysium. And I know, again, for the sake of semantics, a lot of people will look at that and think more tendon structure. And these are terms that most coaches are already familiar with. But the semantics piece aside, we know that fascia integrates and intersects not only just the muscle itself, but also at the myotendinous junction. And so for that reason, the fascia and the tendon become very almost not interchangeable, but almost indistinguishable in terms of the direction of which the fibers are running and the function of the tissue itself. Compression is looking more towards things like brachiofascial, dorsal fascia, and then fascia lata, which for this we're thinking about compression, tension, and kind of in a regionalized or a sectionalized fashion, and then the fascial tissue is responding to that and providing continuity and structure. This also is said to help influence circulation, and again we are seeing this assisting with proprioception. Lastly, for the separating fascia, this is really the deep fascia that is more so just for suspending and maintaining organs, keeping all of the intestines and all of the deep organs and everything just compartmentalized and kind of structured where they need to be. So this, in a sense, is not going to necessarily have any applications or any considerations in training, but these are, again, things that are good to be aware of, even though they may not be things that we can directly influence. And I also think, too, here, this is, where we have another great indication of how permeable the fascial system is and how it really does create a connection network from functional muscles to the skeletal system, to the tendons, and then all the way to the organs. And everything is being, at least if nothing else, transmitted through and around these different structures. So wellness, stress management, hydration, nutrition, this is where I kind of see the intersecting network between what we do as strength and conditioning practitioners and then what the external kind of extraneous factors consist of, and how those 2 worlds merge. So hopefully that was as interesting and as insightful as I found it to be. But nevertheless, with this, it's good for us to continue to investigate not just what the fascial system is, but how we understand it, and then how we understand it between different modalities or different industries.